could.
I could be wrong.
I could.
I could.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
I could be.
I could.
I could be wrong.
Could be.
I could be.
I could be.
You know, I could be wrong.
Hey, welcome back to I Could Be Wrong. This is actually our season finale of season 2. The last I Could Be Wrong episode that we record this year. But we will be back in January with a new season with new topics. We're really excited about that. But for today, I'm joined with Pastor Matthew.
Hey.
We're going to talk about excellence and a spirit of excellence in our own individual lives, which I'm super excited about. I know excellence is something that I care a lot about, something you care a lot about, especially when it comes to ministry, but even outside of those things. Can't wait to talk about that. But as always, before we do, let's talk about a hot take. What do you have for us this week?
I think all stop signs should be removed and they should be turned to yields. Because have you ever seen the videos?
I didn't think you were going to say that.
Yeah. Come on now. You agree with me at the end of this. Have you ever seen the videos of other countries, like specifically like India, sometimes like Asia, where like...
Have you seen like the big roundabouts?
Right,
just
like
chaos.
with the cars, it's just chaos and there's never an accident.
Yeah.
I am convinced that to some degree, the signs themselves force us to have accidents because people like some don't obey, some do obey. But if everyone just knew every intersection, you're taking your life into your own hands.
You got to pay attention.
You got to pay attention. I think it would just naturally force you to like, I have to pay attention because a car could be coming this way. And also, doesn't everyone kind of roll through stop signs anyway?
Oh, yeah.
Like it's actually one of my pet peeves is when everyone's honoring it and someone doesn't. So like, yeah, you technically got to the area quicker than me, but you didn't come to a complete stop. I'm at a complete stop. So technically I should go first, but you don't. So like in my mind, just turn them all to like some form of yield and let everyone just free for all.
No, that's a good point. In the spirit of even talking about like excellence today, I hate when things aren't functional. That's a big part of excellence. And my least favorite feeling, I'm not kidding, the worst part of my week is Sunday mornings. I drive here, it's like 6 a.m. Yeah. And I somehow catch every stoplight.
Yes.
There's no one there. There's no function to this right now. This could be, not only could it be a stop sign, probably a yield sign, and just the thought of sitting there for a minute and a half. Like I live, if you're in Lancaster, I live right off 6, and there's like by the hospital, there's a really long light, and every Sunday I'm like, I'm gonna burn this place to the ground. Like, who will allow this to happen? Makes me so angry because it's not functional at that point. It's just making people's day worse.
If every intersection was just like free for all. I am serious. I think like we would learn to make it quicker.
How do you feel about roundabouts? I know in our state we're seeing a lot of people shift from like 4-way stops to roundabouts.
The only problem with roundabouts now is the people who don't know how to use them. So like you have that and you have to drive aggressive, and that's a part of it. Like I was behind a car yesterday. I was driving to my son's game, and at every like they would come to a stop sign, and we're kind of going the back road to get to Taze Valley, and so we're driving. But like if there was a car coming like 30, 40 yards away, like I'm behind this car, like verbally saying, go, go, you know what I mean? Like that. Yeah. And it was like every single time. So I was like, that is the person who ruins roundabouts because they don't know just to like, just be aggressive and match the energy.
Right. Ironically, being too patient ruins the experience for everybody. Like you have to drive defensively and aggressively at the same time.
Yeah,
you got to take your opportunities. Yeah. All right. For me, my hot take is, this is one I ran it by Michael Hall before I came in here, who gets madder than anybody about everything. Like I just know. So I know if I get him up in arms, it's a good hot take. Well, I believe that all cola products taste the same. Generally the same. I understand there are subtle nuances, but I think to someone who's not an expert, I think Pepsi and Coke generally taste the same.
So you would say dark cola.
Dark cola. And I'm also not talking about interesting flavors like Dr. Pepper or root beer. I'm talking about like RC Cola, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, things that are like generally that whole thing. And
100% agree.
And I have a theory to prove it behind it. My wife famously hates Pepsi. Like I remember we were at a restaurant when we were dating. She asked for a Coke, and the lady asked if Pepsi was okay. And I'll never forget her response. Made me laugh so hard. She just said, "Is Monopoly money okay?" Like implying that, like that's how gross. Like no, I'm not going to pay with real money if you're not going to give me a real Coke, right? She loves Coke, hates Pepsi. And I've just had this theory for years. I also have a theory about my wife that once she gets her mind set on something, it's pretty made up. Yeah. So, she decided, she watched an episode of The Office, a show that everyone loves. She's like, I don't like it. And she's set. You can't change her mind. She likes Coke. She's set. So this is I would not recommend married people do this. This is really disrespectful to me. But one time we were on a road trip. It was right after Popeye's chicken sandwich came out, and everyone's talking about it. Everyone's super excited. So we stopped at one because I was like, oh, we're driving past it. Let's go try the chicken sandwich. And she asked for a Coke. They only had Pepsi products, so I filled up a Pepsi. And I'm like, let's just even see if she knows the difference. I filled it up, I took it out, and I kid you not, it was the funniest moment of my life. This is exactly what she did. She took a big sip and went, there's nothing like a fountain Coke. And I'm like, this is the best moment. This is the best moment of my life.
This story is the best because of you, not her. Because I know what went on in your mind.
I was giddy.
Yeah, like you went.
I was like, I got her.
There was probably a second where you had the tension of like, do I just let it pass? But then you're like, I can't.
Well, I waited. I'm like, let me wait. And so I took some time. Again, please don't do this if you're a married person. This is really rude. But I waited, and I even told her, I was just like, so she's drinking it, and I took a sip. I'm like, oh, that really hits different. And she's like, oh, it's the best.
This is your tell me more that you do to your sister.
Yeah. So at the end of it, I'm just like, how was it? Was that as good, as refreshing as you wanted it to be? She's like, oh, one of the best I've had. And I couldn't even hold it anymore. I was like, it was Pepsi. That's not even Coke. I told you it's the same. And you'd think there would be humility in her response, like, oh, maybe I am biased.
Right, yeah.
Rage. She's like, that's dirty. You tricked me on how to do that.
You're the fault.
Yeah, it's my fault.
It's your fault.
It's my fault that she's biased over her cola preferences.
Yeah.
But now it's like the running joke. She's like, well, I guess I'm a Pepsi fan. And she's just like still resentful.
So
I think they're all similar.
They are. Years ago, I did the young adult ministry at our church that we had years ago. And a bunch of friends of mine had said the same thing. They're like, I clearly, no question about it, I can tell the difference.
Yeah, okay? I know one's better.
Yeah, no question. So I did a taste test with all of them. And what I did, I can't remember the exact way, but instead of just doing Pepsi or Coke, like 2 samples, I marked it so it was like you had 3 to drink from. 2 were going to be for some Pepsi, 1 Coke. You know what I mean? Like one, like in reverse. And I had every single person. I had them all marked. Not a single person got it correct. Not a single person. I think I did 4 or something like that. But not a single person got it correct. And I was like, it just goes to show you can't really tell the difference.
No, and which is fine. It's just people are so militant about it.
They are militant
and that's where it gets me up in arms. Like, it's not that.
And that's what makes
maybe
it the
there's
best
a difference.
Hot take, because you're like, come on.
I mean, come on. You know, what are you going to do? But that's still something. If you see Gina, make sure you remind her. I'm like, hey, I heard you really love Pepsi. Just nothing like a fountain Pepsi, and you'll ruin my marriage, but it'll be funny. Yeah. All right, so today we're talking about excellence. You mentioned it this week that we wanted to talk about excellence, and it's interesting when you said it. Anybody who has a relationship with either of us would probably say that that's something we both value,
right?
Independently, but also as ministers, that excellence matters for our ministry, whether it be sermon prep or whether it be something that we're designing in the creative department, or the way that you view our entire staff. A lot of it is under this umbrella of how can we make things more excellent. But what's interesting is when you said that, I'd love to really talk about a culture of excellence and how we both like viewed that in our life. You and I have a similar personality type. We're both 8s on the Enneagram. But the first thing I told you is I think that'll be a good podcast, because I think while we both care about that and we're both similar, I'll bet the way we got to excellence is very different, if that makes sense. Like the way that I've achieved and am trying to achieve excellence in my life probably looks different than how you got to that goal. So that was my first question I had from you. Just to give like context for your journey of excellence. Was there a time in your life that you considered yourself to be unexcellent, where it's like, man, I remember there was a point where I was like, I am not doing this right. I'm dropping the ball. And that was almost the start of my journey of I want to be better. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think for sure. There's so many times that I was and still am unexcellent.
Sure.
For me, my quest toward excellence began in athletics. And so in athletics, there's a really quick feedback system that lets you know if you're excellent or not, right? You win or you lose.
Yeah.
So it can be from not making the team to not getting playing time to losing a game. I mean, there's just like a constant, clear communication to you. And that's why I liked athletics, was it felt fair to me in the sense of like, I mean, there can be an element of a coach that you think doesn't like you and stuff like that. But more often than not,
ball
ball
never lies mentality of like, if you can play, you can play. If you can't, you can't.
Right. And coaches, unless they really want to shoot themselves in the foot, they'll get past any like or dislike. If you can ball, they're going to play you, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so I knew that at an early age that excellence was going to speak for itself.
Right.
And so I had a mindset in athletics that like I wanted to be the best. And I never had this weird, some people have this drive where like their excellence was I had to be better than you. I never had that where I was trying, like picturing people I wanted to be better. I just wanted to be the absolute best version of myself. So I knew in sports, like when I wasn't, I just could compare. I could compare to playing time and other athletes. And so I knew. In ministry, going into ministry, I had a unique calling. I was still in Bible college when I felt God called me to full-time ministry to be a youth pastor. And I was taking over for a guy who had a moral failure. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt I was called to do it.
Yeah.
I also knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, I had no idea what I was doing. So like I stepped into that unexcellent and knowing that. So like at that point, as shocking as it sounds, like I don't think this is wrong to say, I don't think I had ever taught a sermon. I have
Wow.
a vague memory that maybe once when I was a senior, I had to do something like that. Now I had done some public speaking just in different things. I was like in student council and stuff like that,
Sure.
but I'd never done a sermon. So like I knew I was not good at teaching. Like I knew it. I knew I could relate to kids, and I was close enough in age, so I knew like I could fake it to that extent of like I could make something entertaining. But I was not good in leadership. I didn't know how to lead. So like at that point, I'm sure we'll follow up with it. I just went on a very purposed pathway to say like I'm going to become excellent at these things. I also, so talk for like those in our audience that have a faith background, I spent hours in prayer praying that God would empower me to be excellent. So there's a famous story in scriptures where King David, who was like this legendary king, his son Solomon takes over at a very young age when he passes, and God appears to Solomon and says like, I'll give you anything you want. And he says, give me wisdom because I don't know how to govern. I don't know how to lead.
Super good.
And God did. And I quoted that to God. God, I don't know how to be excellent as a pastor. I'm asking you to make me excellent. So I had the humility to know I'm not good, but also I knew who to seek out. So like, and there was that balance of the spiritual and the physical. I mean, I was like working hard, hoping and believing God was going to bless what I was doing.
Yeah.
I didn't just sit back and go like, all right, God, make me good.
Yeah.
I was like, God, you're going to meet me with what I surrender to you. So
that's super good. For me, it came a little bit later. I realized as a young person, I could always just kind of skate by with stuff. So I was my first half of my like teenage life, all about athletics. From the time I could play Pee Wee football till my freshman year of high school, I was on a really good Pee Wee football team. My dad always coached a class just older than me, so it was just like heavy accountability. I'm in every practice all the time, and I was always good enough to like start and play okay without really trying my hardest. Then I quit my freshman year. I broke my hand and I got into music. I still can't like play some guitar chords right because I broke my finger specifically. So I just decided like, all right, football, it was so demanding. It was before some of the culture shift now too. Now we like kids I don't think they even wear pads but once a week now when they practice. Okay. This is still 5 days a week where like you're like the football culture is a little bit different when I was a kid. I just kind of fell out of love with it, burnt me out. And part of it was probably because I wasn't pursuing excellence. I wasn't fully invested. I was doing it because I thought it made me cooler because it was passively fun. Then even with music, I got really obsessed with music, but it still wasn't with a heart to pursue excellence. It was because it was just something cool to do. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I quickly picked up music and I got good at guitar. It wasn't until like Bible college and when I was interning at a church that I realized I was really continuing to skate by and getting away with just playing guitar really good. You know what I mean? Where that's why I had whatever marginal amount of success I had as like a young adult. And it wasn't until I had a conversation with my boss at the time at the church that I was interning at. It was like a really harsh conversation. He sat me down and he's like, hey, he's like, I love you. He's like one of the first people in my life who's ever really direct with me. And he's like, hey, I love you. And I'm going to tell you some truths about yourself. He goes, but it's because I love you. He's like, so as this hurts your feelings, keep in mind what I just said, because that really matters. Yeah. He was just like, you are rude. It's like, people don't like you. You're not personable. I've seen you like be disrespectful to kids on your worship team because I was leading like the youth worship. I was like the next gen worship leader. He's like, I don't know what is so problematic in your life that you're rude to a teenager, to a 13-year-old, but figure that out. He's like, people don't like working with you for that. He's like, and I understand like you care about, you want it to be good, and that's probably why, but like you have to communicate better. And then he also called out like a lot of discipline stuff in my life. He's like, you miss meeting times, like you're always flighty, and he gave me a list of stuff, and he's like, I believe in your potential, and I want to help you work on this stuff. And if I don't bring it to your attention, like I don't think anybody will. And he said, and what he said next really blew my mind. He was just like, you're talented enough that you could probably marginally successful in ministry for your whole life. That would be heartbreaking for me. It's like, I believe that you can do greater things in ministry, but you need to figure some of this stuff out because you can coast if not. And he's like, and that's fine. If that's what you want to do, he's like, that cool. You can leave my office and you can finish out your internship and that's great. But he's like, but I believe you can do something better than that. And that was the first time that I really took excellence seriously of like, okay, right now I've been coasting and getting away with what can I do. And now I'm more interested of like, how can I maximize what I can do rather than just only do what I can right this second. And that almost became an obsession for a few years of like, how can I knew that I couldn't just like have a better brain. I knew that I couldn't but I could maximize what I had. You know what I mean? I knew that I couldn't just like, fill in the blank with whatever thing I felt weak at. We have natural limitations. Some people that might be, teaching, but what we do have, we can make the best we possibly can, and that became really the start of a really long process for me. So if you're thinking about, if there's like a young person listening to this podcast who is in one of those positions, it could be in high school, it could be something as athletics, they want to be excellent in athletics and they're coasting, or it could be someone in their 40s, 50s, 60s who's just like, yeah, I've been, I do want to like achieve a level of excellence in my life. What do you even recommend to somebody like that? Is like here's like a concrete first step you can do of like, here's something I want to be more excellent. What is practical for anybody across that, really any age or season of life?
I think you have to be open to feedback and invite feedback from a source that will be honest with you. I think one of the things that you communicated clearly is, to a certain degree, my guess is you didn't know how bad your unexcellence was until you had that boss sit you down and go,
shows it to you.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's one of the most difficult parts of my job as a boss. So like, there's a side of my job, I'm a pastor, but I'm the boss of our staff, is to have to sit down and tell someone, you think you're crushing it, you're not. Yeah. And I have to do that. And I've had to do that many times over the years. And because all of us have an inability to fully see what we're doing well and not well, we even the weird part about it is we can't even see our potential, but others can. Yeah. So like there are times when like the leaders just don't recognize and don't understand where they're falling short. So you have to invite critique. You have to invite that in. If you go to your best friend or someone that you know is really kind and you go like, so what do you think about today? And they're like, it was awesome. Like, know that that's what they're going to do. That's what they're supposed to do. They're being kind. If you put out something on Facebook, like, here's me singing a song, you're almost no one, unless they're, honestly, you would have to cross over and be a jerk to give real critique.
Oh, sure.
Of
yeah.
them, right?
I wouldn't.
I wouldn't either.
Yeah. I mean, I'm what you would consider like a professional musician. Right. I would not, if someone asked, how am I doing on Facebook? I'm not going to answer that question.
No,
like,
right.
Like, no way.
You're either going to ignore it or you're going to like lie or find the one thing you can compliment.
Yeah.
Like,
find
wow,
something valid.
Man, you sing loud.
Right.
But if you really want to get better, you have to invite someone that knows the next level and say, can you help me get better?
Oh, man,
so like
so
you want to invite into that. So like if like, so for me, when Cole wanted to take lessons, I invited you and asked you, can you help guide him in this? Because I knew I couldn't. I can listen to Cole and tell when he was off key or something like that. I didn't know guitar, but I need someone to go, not just this is what's good, but this is what's going to be excellent. And honestly, I'm still having that conversation with my kids where I'm saying like, don't settle for, you're better than other people and or you're meeting exactly what's expected right now.
Yeah, somebody who's naturally gifted, that's kind of tricky.
That
they can settle. And
that's what I was going to say. When you were talking, I would say, like, I think in some degree the number one threat against excellence is being good enough to pass by comfortably.
Yeah, it's
so like we see it with people that they're like, I'm doing my job. I'm getting my paycheck, right?
Yep,
like I'm doing this job. I'm meeting this expectation. And you go, that's not, in my opinion, that's not excellence. Doing the job well when you have higher potential, to me, is still falling short of excellence, because your standard of excellence is not the same standard of excellence as the other person.
Yeah, super good. I want to take it in a second. I want to take a step back and really from that specific and ask kind of the macro question of why does that even matter? Why does excellence matter? But before I do, there's something that you just said that I'd love to hear your opinion on this. I have a belief that that's why many churches stop growing, because at one point they probably were excellent. I just had a conversation with a new employee about this yesterday, about the culture of critique that we have, where I was like, if you ever are out of things to critique, you're probably being lazy.
Right.
And his response was almost surprised. Like, so you're telling me like you always have to have something negative to say? Because if you're not familiar with that culture of critique, that can feel kind of harsh. If like, you're telling me you're just always ripping stuff down, isn't that sad? What I said, but my response to that was like, I think a lot of churches at one point accomplished excellence and said, I don't really have that much critique this week. And then a year goes by, I'm like, yeah, we're still killing it. And they're not growing or taking in new things. And so it's just enough to coast. And all of a sudden 30 years goes by and your once growing church is now shrinking. Sure. If that makes sense. So I have this belief that like if you're not hungry for that critique, if you're not hungry for that person to say, here's where you're missing, where you almost are talented enough to coast, I have a belief that that's why a lot of churches plateau, is because they stop that hunger of like, give me the new information, give me the 100%. New stuff. Would you say that's fair?
100%. And so even the conversation you just had, and I apologize about my voice, just if people are listening, I'm kind of losing my voice. Even the conversation that they said, so you have to find something negative, that even shows you to some degree that they don't fully understand critique, because they're viewing critique as a negative.
As an attack almost.
Right.
Yeah.
Critique is not a negative. It's not even finding the negative. It's finding the potential of what can be better. So for our culture, we would say the critique is finding the good. It's finding the whatever you want to call it, the margin of where we can increase.
Yeah, I love
so
that.
like when we point out stuff, so I'll be fair. There are some critique we're pointing out the bad, right? I mean, like you're pointing out like that thing did not work. You're pointing that out. But we're also evaluating stuff, saying how can we get better in these things, and we're looking for that margin of increased excellence. So like here's a perfect example. Like one of the things we talked about yesterday in our youth leadership meeting, because you're on the youth team also, is we were saying like it's possible that some of the things we're doing in youth ministry, the audience that we're talking to that's critiquing it, which are the bought-in student leaders, that their perspective does not actually reflect the whole group, because what they like and they love might not be the same thing. They might not feel the same way that the visitors feel. So in our culture of excellence and critique, we're like, how can we get the opinions of another group just to make sure that we're doing as good as we think we're doing? So like this group's like, this is my absolute favorite part about youth ministry. This other group might look at that and go, it's not ours. And so a culture of excellence says, let's make sure that we're asking the questions that someone else doesn't want to ask. So when we look at churches, I would say that is oftentimes, I would say, I'm going to say it so boldly, I think it's always, with a few exceptions, the reasons why churches quit growing is they quit asking the tough questions. They quit seeking out how they can improve, because a culture of excellence is so much more work than a culture of comfort and coasting. And so like everyone has a moment or a season potentially where you coast, because there just has to be that rhythm of like we work hard. Okay, let's live this out for a moment. We work hard. Like, and I'm not saying you're lazy, but it's like, let's try this out.
But you got to live in it to even critique it fairly. You got to live in your system. You got to take a deep breath, recuperate, so you can then, all right, let's dive back into it.
And so many churches just stay there, and they go
because it's safe and it's comfortable.
And they don't, and the people who are connected to it don't know to critique, and so they think like we're crushing it. The new people coming in, that's not excellent anymore. So it's the churches who have been singing the same style of music for 15 years. Well, style of music has changed. You know, the church who, I see this all the time. You go into a church and it physically hasn't changed in 10, 15, 20 years. And when they built it, when they redecorated it, and it was a huge hit, awesome. Well, that all went out of style. That color scheme is no longer in style. That carpet hasn't been in style for 15 years. Like all of that wears out, and no one is stopping, looking at it, saying, "Is this excellent? Is this excellent design? Is this excellent decoration? Is this music even contemporary? Is it excellent?" And that's the tough part, because and you know this, and I know this. To critique and to answer the question means you're creating more work for yourself. And that's the part of it that I think many people don't want to pursue excellence, because you are creating more work for yourself.
Oh, it's a lot of work for yourself. And not only that, when you embrace a lifestyle that critiques everything you're in, it could be your marriage, work, doesn't matter. You're ensuring that you will always have labor to do. You're ensuring that you will always 100%. Be busy. And that is such a thing that is an aversion to people, because at times almost I can trick myself into believing that like the American dream is if I work really hard, then I don't have to work hard. You know what I mean? Where it almost feels like the reward. Like now I think some people's personality structure is a little bit different. So I mentioned that how you and I are a similar Enneagram. We're both type 8s, and that naturally leads us to be a little bit more growth centric, where I feel more fulfilled when I'm breaking stuff and trying to fix it. But for a lot of people who might not have that personality type, it almost feels like the reward. If I work really hard, then I don't have to work hard. But the reality is, if you want always to achieve excellence in your life, it means hard work forever. So here's my question. If we know that because this is really demotivating for ensuring people, like, you want to know how to be excellent? It's just hard work forever, right? That's kind of demotivating. Why is that even worth it? Like, why is it worth pursuing excellence, whether it be in your personal life or in your work or ministry specifically, if there's someone listening who that applies to them?
So in ministry, excellence is because souls are at stake, you know? So like on that sense, and I'll apply this to other levels too. But for me, I'm biased in this situation, but I think what we do is the most important thing that can be done in the sense of building the kingdom of God, advancing the kingdom of God.
Stakes are high.
Stakes are high. So like, I want to be clear. If someone's listening and they're from another church and they're wanting to hear a perspective, what I just said might have sounded super superficial to them, right? Because they go, "Oh, you're talking about like the decorations. You're talking about the decor. You're talking about the style of music. We're here to win souls," right? You could have that, and I would go, "Okay, but who's coming in to your environment and being drawn to it?" Because like for our value system as a church is, we want our decor to represent what looks like a mall, like a high-end mall, like Easton. And I say high-end, not in that things have to be expensive, but
not
just
bougie or just
but
culturally
high quality,
appropriate. Yeah.
or a hotel lobby. Because when I travel, those are the places that I go into that I go, this looks cool. Like
I feel welcomed.
Yeah.
I feel
hotel lobbies are some of the coolest, like of nicer hotels and stuff, are some of the coolest places. Like a newly done airport, a newly done.
Great example.
Yeah. You walk in and you go like, this is cool. Like,
versus the alternate of all three of those on the dated side, you walk into a hotel lobby is dated. I don't feel welcomed. I immediately feel like
it feels dirty.
It feels dirty, and it's no longer somewhere where I feel welcomed. It's now something that I have to get through.
Exactly.
Rather than stopping and making home there for a day.
So for us, excellence is in all areas of all things that we do. So from the moment a person walks in, we know. So we actually would take a step back and say, we know from the parking lot attendants, like they're helping them, all the way to when they walk in, to signage, to the decor, all the way into the seat, to the way the place smells, to the way it looks. Like, you will have a hard time walking around our church and finding something broken.
Yeah.
Like you won't find a
or
nick
dirty
in the wall or dirty.
There's kids everywhere.
Right.
This last weekend we had over 300, like 315.
315 from 0 to 6.
Just like children, and yet it's clean. That is a crazy. As a father of 3 kids, and my house is always chaotic. It's incredible the fact that. But that's what excellence looks like in our culture. We want people to feel welcomed.
Because when a person walks through and sees stains and sees chip paint and stuff, it just says non-excellence. Yeah. Okay. So all of that, people go like, okay, again, Matt, you're still talking superficial things. Okay. But all of the excellence causes someone to just feel at ease, to feel like things are on purpose. And now when they step into the environment and everything's done with excellence, so the music quality is with excellence, we've removed all distractions, and now they're able to experience the fullness of what we're trying to offer them. We're trying to offer them an opportunity to experience the presence of God. The teaching that I put a ton of hours into, and I know all of our communicators do, so that I can communicate truths in a clear way that they know how to apply to their lives on Monday. Yeah. All of those things. So if you come in and the place is dirty and it smells and things are broken and the systems don't work, by the time you sit down, you're a little frustrated, right? And or you're already turned off. You're a little bit like, but when you come and you sit down and all that's removed, all that's a part of excellence. Yeah. So you are making more work, but the souls are at stake. Now, take a step back. You know this too. Like, if it's your profession, excellence is what's going to allow you to stay relevant. So like in music, like the bands that made 1-2 albums and then are like, we're good.
And then dropped off. Yeah.
And drop off. Right. Or they're doing reunion tours and still singing the same songs for 40 years. You know, you can make a buck off of that. But like excellence allows you to stay relevant, and in the world, it allows you to progress. So like if you take the spiritual out of it, if you're a young person or any person and you want to advance in your environment, excellence is the pathway to advance. So like even in our environment, if you get hired, I'm not promoting anyone based on like how many years you've been here. Like there is no promotions based on seniority or anything like that. It's all excellence based. Do your job well. So like I'll talk about you. When you came on staff, this is honest truth, and you can push back. I don't think you will. But from the moment I hired you, I don't think I've ever once had a meeting with you where I've asked you to do more. I've never said like, hey, Michael, like, what's going on, dude? Like it's always, if anything, I've had to at times rein you in a little bit to say like, okay, we don't have the finances for that or the staffing for that yet. But like, how can we figure out? Because I didn't want to like squash what you're doing. Yeah. And so like, even in your own mind, like every single thing you're looking at it going, how can we be better? Yeah.
How can we maximize it? And like, I would consider that the analogy that came to my mind, and if you're listening to this and you're a musical person or a musician at all, or even if you really like music, I hope this analogy makes sense to you. But like, you can have, so my job here at the church is I'm the creative pastor. A lot of what I deal with is what people would classify as the superficial. It's aesthetic, it's music. When you talk to like real theologians, it's stuff that they don't care about. Like, no, I just want to hear about the word of God. Like all the other aesthetics, a lot of what you even just shared, they don't care about that. That is what my job is mostly focused on, is what does the graphic design look like? What's the shot composition of this video? What's the melody of this song? And here's like a really good example of why that stuff really does matter. As a songwriter, I can appreciate the fact that I can write the most dynamic lyric ever. And it could be really rich and really theologically rich. If I don't match that with a melody that hits people or hits home or connects to somebody, no one will ever hear that song, and no one will ever care about that song. There's something powerful about music, of something about melody and lyric that when they come together, it can wreck someone emotionally. It's my favorite thing about music. We were talking about Jeremy Riddle over text a couple nights ago. He's one of both of our favorite worship leaders. He's incredible. I heard him say something probably a decade ago about songwriting that stuck with me. He said, your job as a songwriter is not to come up with new truth. We have the truth. It's the word of God. It's to communicate the truth in a way that might connect with somebody in a way they'd never understood it. And that could be through melody or lyric, by finding a creative way to explain that truth, or in a way that emotionally conveys it through the melody and the vocalization of the song. And that's something where as a musician, I so connect to. You can say like a really plain lyric. The song we're doing it this Sunday, Firm Foundation. So if you're listening to this, no, it'll still be this Sunday because I think this comes out tomorrow. Song Firm Foundation. There's this part at the end where Cody Carnes like finally goes up the octave. He's the guy who wrote the song, goes, he won't. And it's such a huge moment. Right. It is the most simple song lyric ever. Like he won't. And it's not even a complete thought because it's implying the rest of it that he won't fail. Right. But just he won't. But there's something about the way he sings that line. It is so guttural and almost like this desperate cry of like, I know because I've seen, and the rest of the song sets up the context. And to hear the passion, to hear the way the melody hits, to hear the way the guitar plays, the way the drum hits, all tell this beautiful story. And that to me is excellence. Right. So when you come into our church, and that's why I think it matters, is we have this timeless, life-changing truth of the Word of God that forever will apply. Our responsibility is to be excellent in how we communicate it. And so for us, that excellence often looks like cultural relevancy. Would you say that's fair? It's like a part of it's literally our mission statement. Yeah. It's like we want to be relevant to all audiences and people who come into our building because we believe in that truth. We believe that it's timeless. We want to steward it well. Yeah. You know?
No, I mean, everything you're saying is so spot on. You said that you're over a lot of things that, I can't remember exactly how you worded it, that are superficial, but I would push back and say not really.
Sure, yeah.
Because of everything you're saying, all of it goes together to form the environment, to form what we're doing. So like, I need the children's ministry to be excellent. They need me to be excellent. I need the worship to be excellent. You need me to be excellent. Like
we need the janitorial staff to make sure things look really clean because we want to set that table. You told me this years ago. I thought it was so cool about like, you know, when you go to someone's house and they like lit candles and like it's like you could tell they prepared for you. It just makes you feel welcome. Right. There's power in that.
Yeah. So that's my phraseology that I've used a lot when I'm doing like leadership training and talking with people. Is that example? Is the when you show up at someone's house and the house is clean, candles are lit, and the lights are the perfect.
Yeah. They know their combination of lamps and over it. Like they know. Yeah.
Food's at the table's set. Like you go in and you go, you prepared for me.
Yeah.
And it just sets a different vibe. Now, when you go to someone's house, and here's the thing, like we all have friends that you go over to the house and their house can look however.
Like a grenade
you're
went
always,
off and sure.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I mean, like those special moments, and then versus you go to a person's house and they're still kind of cooking the food and like nothing's set. And you just like, okay, you didn't prepare for me, right? Like it has a different vibe. We want the feeling of we prepared for you. Yeah. So like I tell our team, like I don't want in rooms chairs stacked on against the wall. I don't want a table leaning against the wall. I don't want
walk down a hallway and see just like crap laying there. Yeah, sure.
I walked down a hallway a couple weeks ago and there was one of the arrows on the ground in the children's ministry that just something had taken a divot out of it. And I went to Cheyenne. I said, hey, do you still have can you print those out? And she goes, I know which one you're talking about. It happened before. Yep. That day, boom, it's a new one's down there. And it's like simple things like that.
That's such a little thing.
Right.
And I don't want to throw shade at any other church, but when you walk into a church where they're not paying attention to details like that, because those little things all pile up to 100 little things, to 1,000 little things, and that creates the overall image. So if you're listening to this and you're like, man, does that seem nitpicky? Like literally a little corner out of an arrow, does that matter? It matters because if you have 50 little things like that, you are telling someone subconsciously how much you care for them and how much you care that they came into your home.
Right.
And there's so much power in preparing that table for people. I realized that early on as a worship director, where I was so passionate. And if you're a worship director and you're listening to this, take this super seriously. This is a great way to honor people's time. I wanted to make it a goal that when people came in, you walked in, you plugged in your instrument, you played what you practiced, and you went home. Because they don't work at the church. They have a family that they just took time away from to come serve the church. They probably took 10 hours that week to rehearse their parts. The last thing I want to do is then walk in and be like, oh, we have to troubleshoot this cable. Yeah. That's my least favorite. When I'll go like guest worship leader to church or go, no, I won't say examples, but I'll go guest worship leader. It's like, you did not set the table. We just took 2.5 hours to rehearse 4 songs because we didn't set the table. Yeah. It always feels like it's not an honor of my time. So I remember back in our old building, I would take down every cable at the end of every Sunday and every because we would like to clean stage, and I would rerun every one. I'd take a mic into each XLR, make sure the line is done, make sure the sound is every little thing obsessively that I could do to make things as smooth as possible. because here's the reality of it. You can say you don't really need all that to worship God. You're so right. You don't need all that to worship God.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that the people who come into our church every Sunday, whether or not we need that to worship God, are still worth that excellence.
Yeah,
they're
sure.
worth our very best. And more importantly, God is worth our excellence. We're
Yeah.
not talking about all the stuff that's needed. You just need your own voice and a couple friends to worship God. You're by yourself. That's what you really need to worship God.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not going to convince me that excellence doesn't apply to all those things.
Yeah, so we want to do a series coming up in the new year called "Dat Weird." Like it's something my son used to say. Like before he could speak properly, you go "Dat Weird." But that is one of those things that is strange. I don't hear it a ton, but I hear it periodically where people try to celebrate sloppiness as if that's more Holy Spirit. Like the Holy Spirit almost has a reputation of like he can't plan ahead and it can't be done with excellence. Like. No, he's just, the Spirit.
I got that a lot in Bible college. I went to a charismatic Bible college.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, you're out. I heard this word for word. You're outplanning the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. So in my mind, I go, when you look at creation, do you see disorder? Like the beautiful design of everything. Good. So like God took a lot of attention to detail in creation. So those things don't dishonor God. And even other scriptures. I mean, Ephesians 2 something another, whatever your hand finds to do with all your might.
Yeah.
It's like the mindset of like you have the Spirit of God empowering you toward excellence. So like earlier on, you were talking about that the one song and the lyric. One of the things I've loved and respected about you in worship writing. So this is the truth. I don't say this just because on the podcast. You are my favorite worship leader. I actually just texted that to you this week.
Yeah,
I was talking to Mary about it, and I said, next to Michael, Jeremy Riddle is my favorite worship leader. But one of the things I loved about you was you didn't settle for a line that fit. You would rework it. So when you talked about that one line of Cody Carnes, I'm guessing the first time he sang that song, that line didn't happen. Right. Or, it didn't go that way. Like you practice it and you try it and you work it out. And then like all of a sudden you figure out, okay, that hits. Now he figures out that hits. He figures out, okay, this package, this is the song at its best. That's what he releases. Now you're able to do his version and really have a special moment and it blesses the kingdom of
church.
God.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And in your lyric writing, like I remember even telling you, like one of the things I hated so much about Christian music was I could listen to a song for the first time and guess the next line.
Yeah.
So it's like, the song goes da 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 da, just like a dove, and I'm like, and here comes the word love.
Yeah.
And is God's love.
Yeah, we get it. Fire and desire rhyme. We get it.
Right. Yeah. And so like in yours, it would not be the obvious. It would be creative. And I was like, that's what I wanted. And you had that energy because again, it's not just for you. It's for the kingdom of God as a whole. Yeah. And we should be offering God our best. Like at one point in history, the greatest artists and the greatest musicians were associated with the church. Yeah. That should be the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's like, there are practical things you can do to it. So that's actually my next question to you. I want to hear to you specifically as a boss. I would love to hear from both perspectives to you as a boss. How do you pursue excellence as being a boss? Yeah. And what kind of excellence do you expect from an employee? But before I do, just speaking about worship writing, there's something we'll literally do. It always hurts my feelings. I've never not had my feelings hurt by this. But we'll take a song that we wrote, and before we even sing it in front of our church for the first time, we call it the highlighter, take, where we'll take a yellow highlighter and highlight anything that could be better. And sometimes something gets marked up, like, that was my favorite part. Or like, or sometimes it hurts because it's like, I thought this one was done. And songwriting is kind of a burnout process sometimes. Sure, like, I cannot hear that melody one more time. Or it's like, that's good enough. Very easy in songwriting to get to that's good enough place. But we always take the highlighter to it. And anything that we highlight, we're going to rewrite until that what is currently the weakest point of the song is now the strongest point of the song. And I'll be really candid with you. We've released music that we have compromised on. One of my favorite songs we've ever written is called Brokenness and Glory. We named a whole album after it. And I love the lyrics to that song. Lyrically, it's probably the most rich song we've ever written. And I got lazy with the melody. We're bringing people who hear this like, no, I love that song. I understand. From my perspective, I'm only talking about me. Sure. I know that I could have done the verses specifically better justice. The bridge is cool. It's this great, like, grand declaration of like, who am I to stand in your presence? Who am I but dirt and grace? And I remember I wrote that, and Mary was just like, let's write a nice part now. She's like, are you okay? And then, so she wrote this secondary part where it's, where if you know Mary, it's like you can hear her tone of voice in it. But the bridge is like, who am I to stand? We wrote it, from Isaiah being in the throne, like, who am I to stand in your presence? Who am I to sing your praises? Who am I to be known by your glory? Who am I but dirt and grace? And Mary comes in and just sings like a bunch of bold declarations prophetically over your life. Like, I'm loved, I'm redeemed, I'm alive, I'm set free, I'm all this. And it's this really cool thing. great bridge. The verses, every time we sing them live, I'm like, oh, it's just a snoozer. It's like, man, and it haunts me every time we play it. Of like, it stinks that bridge was such an epic moment of that album. But that's the consequence of compromising, is you really are talking about something that could be valuable. Now I know when people listen on Spotify, they're not going to get to the 2 minutes and 30 in to get to that dope part that might change their life, or the Holy Spirit might speak into their life in a new way. Right. Because I got to get through the boring part.
My brother Daniel, who's a musician, he was part of a band that actually had some success at one point. But I remember he had this one song that started off real distorted, like intentionally, and he always joked that people that were listening to it were like, play. Nope. And then we got to the rest of the song,
because
and
get to the good part. Yeah, that's a real tension. That's just where the excellence part matters, where it's like, if I probably would have been more disciplined at that season of my life to take the time to try 3 new melodies on that verse, that song could have been different. It could have impacted more people. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Okay, so going back to what I said earlier, as a boss, how do you, if anybody in here is a coach of people or you manage people in your life, how do you personally pursue excellence as you oversee people?
Oh man, many ways first of all, I have to be excellent at all that I do in order to create a culture of excellence, because otherwise it's a culture of hypocrisy, where I'm demanding something that the staff clearly knows I'm not doing.
You're not willing to do.
Yeah. So I'm saying, do what I say, not what I do.
That's tough.
And there are a lot of leaders that are that way, and nobody respects them. And it ultimately creates resentment, and it creates a really divisive culture, because you basically learn to like manipulate your boss or fake it to your boss. But if I pursue excellence and everybody knows I'm pursuing excellence, then it creates a really authentic culture where we want to do that. We're willing to do it. For me as a boss, here's what's the challenge. I'll say this. The challenge of me being the boss is I'm going to get very little critique that I don't invite. Okay. Almost no one will just naturally go out of their way and critique me.
Yeah, it's rare.
So I know that.
Yeah.
And so I have to be aware of that not every idea, if every meeting I'm in, my idea is the best idea, it's because the staff is afraid to tell me the truth.
Big red flag. Yeah.
Big red flag. So I've been really intentional about this.
Yeah.
My idea is not always the best idea. So me and you, many of our meetings and many of the conversations start with, this could be a really bad idea.
Really dumb.
But that's my way and your way of giving permission to say, it's okay to say no to what I'm about to say. And so like in that, I have to recognize I have to get outside sources too that will critique and create a culture where it's okay to critique what's going on. This past Sunday, I had a huge mistake this past Sunday. So again, the average person would not notice this. Okay. For the first time in my ministry, and this is not an exaggeration, the first time in my ministry, I preached a sermon that I did not practice. So I always go over my notes multiple times before I get up on stage. I had a unique week where I just had meetings every single day, all day. My sermon prep got later into the week. I knew what I was preaching on because we're in a series and I knew the content. But when I got the content done on Saturday, two of my kids had games at 2 different times of the day. I had stuff in between. It was just one of those days that I never got to go over the entire message and teach it. And so when I got up on Sunday to teach, and it's an important message, I didn't have a time frame of what it was going to be. Yeah. I looked at my notes. My notes were not some of my longer notes. I naively thought, well, it should still fall within the 45-minute range, 42 to 45. On top of that, I had to interview Brandon. So here's the mistake I made. I went so long that the final song that you guys practiced so hard on that was so creative was cut. That was a total loss. That's my failure. No one said anything to me, and I knew no one would. Yeah. No one would come up to me and go, like, let's be honest, your sermon was good, but it should have been shorter.
Sure.
I have to have enough inward perspective, reflexive, or whatever, to go, I messed up.
Yeah.
And so I said to myself, and I even spoke this to some other people, I said, this Sunday, I won't make that same mistake because I'll do whatever is necessary to make sure I hit my time frame.
Yeah, sure.
So excellence as a leader, you have to recognize, you have to create whatever system it is that holds you into account and also gives you proper feedback.
Yeah.
So in other meetings, I still recognize this to this day, there are some staff that aren't yet comfortable to push back on me. And so I have to go to the staff I know who will. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it has to begin with me speaking to say, I think what I'm doing is not good. I think this isn't working. Like, would you agree with that? Like,
because then it opens up the foot for them to be genuine. Yeah. Man, that's some real mental jiu-jitsu in a positive way.
But it has to be.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Like, I'm even working with a new employee, new working with me, not new to our staff employee. working in a situation. And I told them this past week, I said, I know I still intimidate you, but part of our working relationship is you got to get past that. I'm going to do my best to create an environment where you feel really, really safe. But your effectiveness is you have to get past it so that you can speak to me truth.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be what builds the relationship and allows us to be excellent as we work together. So again, as a boss, you pursue excellence by increased knowledge, increased studying, learning and getting better at your job, but also creating an environment where you're getting proper feedback, and it will not naturally happen.
Yeah.
So like I've been around pastors that, like I was around a pastor recently of a very, very large church. And as I'm around and I'm seeing the employees engage, I realize as kind as this person is, he has not created a culture where people can speak truth to him.
Yeah.
And however he acts, everyone does like the courtesy laugh. And I'm realizing they don't feel safe to push back on him. And he's created somewhat of like a demigod culture that way. And I just thought, you know what? You're not getting the best out of your staff.
Yeah, and that's so easy to fall into because a lot of times if you're a leader, you can trick yourself into thinking, well, if they felt it, they would tell me. Like if there was a problem, surely they would tell me. There's so much dynamic that goes into not wanting to tell your boss. Just from like the base level of reasoning, that person can fire you and dramatically impact your life, which usually isn't the case. That's always a possibility.
Or stop your promotion.
And also people like to please their boss. Like I don't want to bum out the person who I'm like actively trying to labor hard for and provide the best job that I can. So if you don't do everything you can to set up that system where it's just like where you can ask, and for me, I've realized I've had to ask really, really lead in a similar way, not quite that strategy, but really leading questions of just like, how did this specifically make you feel? For me, my thing is always, how can I help you better next time? So here's what I did this time. This is my assumption where it could be better. Tell me your perspective. Yeah. So now that we've invited like this co-critique, it helps out. It also helps to have somebody who you just stone cold trust no matter what. Yeah. So I have one specific employee, Kenny Birchby is our tech director, that I frequently, probably once a week, will just be like, am I the jerk in this situation? Like what's, or I had an exchange with this employee. That felt frustrating. And he's also director. So he's like, it's good to like work this out. We're frustrated. We're trying to problem solve. What's your perspective? And he and I think, we've talked about it, we think so different. So it's good to have someone who perceives the world dramatically different, who's not going to pull a punch at you and say, well, this is my perception. In worst case scenario, you're just going to hear a perspective that's not yours. Even if you still disagree with it, it's beneficial to stretch your brain and to expose yourself to a way of thinking that you might not have. And that to me is like, that's been one of the most valuable things in my life. So that's from your perspective as a boss. My perspective as an employee, and I'd love to hear what you would want from your employees too, but just from my perspective, how I pursue excellence as someone who's kind of on both sides of that coin is to constantly be intaking new information and allowing it to create actual change. Thoughts are free. Anybody can read an article and be like, well, isn't that interesting? You know what I mean? Anybody can consume new content and be like, well, I'm fascinated by that. If you're not taking stretches and taking steps and trying new things, then you will never grow. Doing the same thing doesn't lead to anything. So whether I'm leading my team and trying to get a better thing out of them, sometimes it comes up with me shaking it up. Like, we're going to try something new this week. It might fail, but guess what? There's safety in that failure because I know that you've created an environment where there's safety in failure. As an extension, I've created an environment where there's safety in failure. And we're going to try new stuff. And if you're and please hear me, that's not an excuse to start trying dumb stuff. Like it still needs to be informed and well read and educated and like sought out with wisdom, but you have to be willing to try new things. You have to be willing to do that in an informed way. And when you do that, all of a sudden over a long period of time, your culture shifts in a positive way where all of a sudden, oh, that really wasn't, we've talked about this recently. Advertising has always been a weak point for us. Even initially advertising to our own church. I remember when I first started working here, we would say like, we're just so bad at like keeping our church up to date with stuff. And I remember it would almost be mentioned in a jokey way. Even I would say like, yeah, it's just not a strong suit of ours. And eventually it almost became like an intolerant aspect. I'm like, no, I want to be the best at it. It's the same thing with the highlighter. Like I want to be the best at advertising. Like how do we?
Well, before you finish that thought, we got to a point almost where we gave in, where we said like either it's us or them.
They're just last minute planners. Yeah, and that's why there's no sign-ups.
Yeah, we can't do it. So and then again, the competitive side of us was like,
there's just got to be a better way. So we took like years, painstaking. How many iterations of church announcements have we done? I mean, endless.
Yeah, I mean, because we tweaked it so many times. Yeah.
So we've had all these different versions, and it's like to find, but we never gave up. Like there has to be a way that we can communicate what is happening in our church in a way that's not going to make people bored. Because we would change it, and change is as good as a rest. So for 2 months, you'd get more engagement where everyone's all of a sudden glued to the screens. You're like, we did it. We finally mastered 2 months. And then people are like talking during church announcements again. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. How do we fix this? And now we're probably in our favorite iteration of it. We've had it for a year and we really like it. We still tweak it, but we really like where we're at. But that's come from always being changing, always trying new things. So that's the one thing I would say that has like really helped. Make informed changes and then change those changes and change those changes.
Yeah. You have to. So let me speak to that before you ask the next question. So what you just said about taking in new information, you should develop a culture where you're intrigued by the information that offends you. So like
that's really good.
You know what I mean? Where you read an article that tells you your system is broken and you don't think your system's broken. Yeah. That should be the article that intrigues you.
Yeah, because how easy it to be like, well, they're dumb.
Yeah. How often do I forward you or you forward me, whether it's a TikTok video or it's an article or something of someone basically saying, hey, you guys know what you're doing right now? It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And we're like
just ripping up the church or a deconstruction thing.
Yeah, deconstruction or someone's going like this type of music or this type of teaching or this type of environment, whatever. And it's not because I'm going to allow it to have total sway, but I'm like, I want to know that information because I want to know if there are trends. I want to know the trends of culture. Because here's the other part about excellence. For us, if you don't create an environment that's relevant to the culture who changes, all you're doing is making now the circle that's already inside, you're making them happy and you're reaching them, but you're not even fulfilling the Great Commission. You're not going into all the world. So like there has to be an element of constantly changing. So whether that's in the church or in business even, the culture constantly changes. So you have to know what's changing.
Yeah, super good. Yeah, for me, and like one more strategy before I kind of move on. There's one more thing that it's not a pet peeve of mine, but a lot of times people look for quick fixes to be excellent. I get this a lot with young worship leaders. I've told you this 100 times. I'll talk about this till I'm blue in the face. Oftentimes, young worship leaders will come up to me and be like, what are like 5 things I can do to improve this year? And it's like, man, that is always probably not the right question. Because it's like, first of all, I'm not with you. I don't know what your workflow looks like. I can even come watch one of your services. That does not give me the information I need to know. Yeah. I can like spitball some stuff and throw some general good philosophies. But here's
everybody listen up. I know what he's about to say. I'm serious.
This has been life-changing for me. When I first got to this job, I remember I had a guy tell me that there are 2 ways to take on a new job. Maybe you told me this. Maybe you heard this at a conference. I don't remember. This is a very long time ago. There are 2 ways to approach a new job. Either come in like a hand grenade and blow it up or come in and slow play it and like move the organ 1 inch at a time till it's off the stage. That's very Christianese terms, but like, really good advice though. Like there's sometimes you walk into a situation, you told me of a story of a guy who knew that he had to culturally change his church. So he sat down with all the current members and said, hey guys, you're about to hate what I'm going to do. I'm going to change the music. I'm going to change the vibe of the room. I'm going to paint. You're going to hate everything. But if you can stay and sacrifice your preferences, you'll be able to disciple the incoming generation. And it was generally successful. So that's like the hand grenade method. There's also the 1 inch at a time, slowly make change. For me, I've found more success in slowly making change. I haven't been a lead pastor to be the hand grenade situation, right? And maybe that might be called for. But here's what I've realized. It's very rarely 5 big things. It is a million little things. And the only way to do that, going back to what we said earlier, is a culture of critique. It might be nitpicky to say like there's a little nick out of that arrow in the hallway. But if you find 100 of those little things and change it over a year, here's what I found myself when I took over as worship director towards where I was like 3 years in. All of a sudden I ran out of obvious stuff to fix. The sound wasn't bad anymore. The players were playing pretty well. Like, we could vibe on a song and stretch it out and it not feel clunky. And I found myself running out of things to critique to where I had to go learn more stuff to find more things to critique. But all of a sudden I realized like, I don't even know how I did that. And it's because there wasn't these massive jumps. It was endlessly critiquing it harder than any person in the room. I could go into a meeting with you and you could give me some stuff. And I remember you complimented me on this early on. Like I can critique you, but I know you probably already know those critiques plus 5 more. So it's like, it's just not really worth my time. Like I trust that you're going to the ministry, leave me alone kind of comment. Not in a bad way, but you're just like, okay, go do your thing. I so militantly critiqued every little thing, every little micro thing to where it's almost annoying. And then 5 years go by, a year goes by, it's a different ministry. And now all of a sudden you can call it generally excellent. Like, whoa, look at what we've built. And people are so afraid to do that because it hurts. Yeah. If I take an honest look, okay, so it's like a little bit behind the scenes. We had a meeting Monday. We were just like, I felt like the back ending of some songs have been rocky. Like, I don't know what's going on. Me 8 years ago would have been like, jerk. Like, what do you know? Are you professional music? I'm a professional music. You could so easily excuse it and be like, it hurts. That hurts your feelings to think like it doesn't anymore. But
let me speak to this for a second because I think this is a perfect illustration of what we're talking about. So what I said to Michael was 2 or 3 weeks in a row, a couple of songs on Sunday ended sloppy. And what I mean by that, like it felt like there wasn't the proper ending. And I said, it happened 2 or 3 weeks in a row, which makes me think you're not hearing what I'm hearing because you do have a culture of critique.
Yeah.
And that was the whole thing of, it was a shock to you guys. And I went, and this is literally what I said in the meeting, if it's a shock to you, it's because what's in your guys' ears is not what I'm hearing out in the crowd. So let's figure out a way to get you out in the crowd to hear it, to see if you can pick up on what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that's why you guys have such a culture of critique. I didn't critique it the first week because I thought they'll catch it. Then it happened the second week, and I thought,
what's going on?
That's odd.
Yeah.
And then there was an element of it the third week, and I went, okay, there's something broken in this because you guys critique stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what.
Yeah. So you know what's really interesting? We have this is actually kind of even to build this point even more. It's the perfect example. We have a new employee this week who's just kind of starting out. He was sitting in on that meeting, and he told me today he went home and told his wife about that. He said, Matthew said something like really intense about how worship songs are like not doing well at the back half, at the end of them right now. It's like, I was surprised that no one had their feelings hurt. And I was just like, part of that breaks my heart that that's not culturally normative. It's because like, well, because Matthew didn't say like, hey, you suck at your job.
No, right.
Like you didn't attack me. You provided a valid critique. And a younger version of myself, if you were to say that to me, I would excuse it away and say, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't understand this. And it's because it hurts sometimes to look in the mirror and say, how can I do that better?
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, if you're willing to do that and you're willing to be the biggest critic of your own ministry in the room, which is hard because the acknowledgement of even a critique means that it was, even if it's small, it was a failure. It could have been better. If you can manage that, if you can stomach it, I promise it leads to growth.
Right.
I promise every single time. And when you see things not growing, it's because people sometimes get so ouchy about their stuff, like don't critique my stuff, or I'll excuse away every critique of it, and then it never gets better.
Right.
And
and that's the key. So that's what I was saying. Like, everybody listen up. What you're about to say. Someone comes to you and says, what's 5 things I can change? And you go, no, I'll just give you one. Develop a constant culture of critique.
Yeah.
And that's where you respond. So like we have ABC, always be changing. It's that idea, always be critiquing, always be just slow, small modifications. And that keeps you healthy. So like you said, the idea of like moving the organ 1 inch. I don't know if anyone's ever heard that story, but it's like, I'm not going to explain it, but it's the idea of making small changes versus a hand grenade, big changes. If you don't want to have to every 10 years drop a hand grenade and do big changes, then you have to have a culture of small changes. That allows you to not only get to excellence, which you had to do. So you came on staff, we were unexcellent in a short time. You made some good changes, but over many years it got to excellence. How we maintain excellence now is always critiquing.
Yeah, always.
And you're not going to have to drop a hand grenade on something because we're always changing. And so you have to create an environment that what I tell people is you plan, you execute, you critique, you repeat.
You do it again.
Plan, execute, critique, repeat. And so that's the culture that we've created. And you can do that in every area of your life, whether it's relationships or it's in the work relationship. So.
Super good. And I would say if you're in a season where you feel like you plateaued, you're like, man, I'm trying to critique, and it just feels like I don't have any – I feel like we're just doing the best. Like, this is it. I don't know how to do better than this. Every time we look at it, I've had seasons like that. I remember I was helping out with youth ministry a few years ago, and I'm like, hey, I need you to sit in on one because, like, I don't know how to make it better. This is the best I have right now. If you're ever in that place, do exactly what I just said. Go to someone you trust and say, can you critique this through your lens, who might have walked that path before you? You were like, very successful in youth ministry, so I wanted to hear your point of view on it. You just got to learn new stuff. You got to get on the internet. YouTube exists. Like, there's no excuse not to research and development right now. So a plateau isn't necessarily bad in a season. So if you heard what Matthew just said and you thought, that sounds exhausting. Like, what if I'm critiquing and I can't come up with anything new? It's just because you haven't learned enough yet, which is okay. But learn more stuff, because you will find new stuff.
Yeah.
Go ask your pastor. Go ask your boss to go sit in on some other company. Go research other companies. Go research other churches. Go sit in on their services. Churches are usually pretty cool. Like, go call a worship leader. Be like, can I shadow you one Sunday to really like? So we're relationally connected to the X Church. Every time I go to X Church and like go lead worship there, I've got 5 new ideas.
Right.
Not because everything's inherently better. It's just different, and it makes you think about your ministry.
Tim took a tour of our building recently because some other group was in touring our building.
Tim's the lead pastor of X Church. If you don't know. Yeah.
And he went back. Actually, he was in this room. He went back from this room and said, there's some things we can do in discipleship. They have a Bible study podcast. They have some other things. So like, we helped influence them in some areas.
Awesome.
So like, that's the relationship of churches, as we go, what are you doing well? How can I learn from you? And so Chris Reed told me today, he met with some people from Grace, who I'm good friends with, Keith Manier, their head pastor. And he's like, they do internships and all of those programs.
Residencies.
Excellent. And so he's like, they've given us a lot of good stuff. So like, it helps us become more excellent because we're learning from other churches.
Okay. Well, I got one final question from you. What do you think, if there's one thing that people should run away from, I feel like this will prevent you from growing. I've got an answer too. So maybe I'll go first. You have a second to think about it.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that can prevent you from excellence, what would that be? For me, the best piece of advice I probably ever got with excellence is to find the smartest person in the room and ask a bunch of questions. So if I'm going to run away from it, it's the arrogance of thinking I don't need to ask questions anymore.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. So like, there was a guy, I'll never forget the first time I really put it into practice. I guess I won't say any names because, just for I want to be able to tell the full scope of the story, but there was somebody on the janitorial staff at the church I was at in San Diego who I just found as a really intimidating person. He was like an older, gruff guy, and I'm just like, man, I don't really know how to talk to that person. I'm like this young guy wearing skinny jeans and dressed like an idiot. I don't know anything about anything that he knows about. He probably thinks I'm a moron. Easily to let that gatekeep you from learning things. I knew that I had to learn how. I had like a 1989 Chrysler Concorde at the time that was just like spray painted and falling apart, and I knew I needed his help. I knew I need this guy to teach me how to fix some stuff in my car because I'm also an intern at church. I was broke. And I knew if I could just get over the fear of talking to him. So for you, it might be fear like I'm afraid, or it might be arrogance of like I don't need anybody. Either, it doesn't matter. It's the same problem. Whatever that thing is that is keeping you from finding the educated, smart person and asking a bunch of questions, run from it. Whether it's your own arrogance, whether it's your own fear of inadequacy, whether it's whatever. He reminds me of my dad and I don't like my dad. Doesn't matter. Find that thing that's preventing you from finding that smart person and just peppering them with questions and crucify it in your life because it will only keep you from learning a bunch of stuff. People I've learned with age are generally people like sharing with you what they know. Bill Sand's a guy, he's my here version of that. He's this older, gruff guy who has a wealth of information. And I know that if I have a question about electrical work or whatever the case might be, I know I can ask him about it and he's gonna tell me. And it makes me better. You just have to get over that barrier, again, whether it be arrogance, fear, ask all those questions, and then all of a sudden, you know more stuff and you can be excellent. That knowledge empowers you too.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say a version of that. I was going to say pride, like that keeps us from excellence because either you think, oh, I've arrived, or you're not willing to learn from other people.
Yeah, super good.
And so I think, and the other one I would say is laziness because like we've already said this numerous times, but it takes so much work to be excellent. Yeah. And I see equal part of both. I see a lot of times, typically this is how it plays out. And I'll say in the church world I'm a part of, pastors become arrogant and lazy. Yeah, and their churches quit growing. So they become arrogant in that they're not allowing people to critique them. They think they have all the answers, and so they don't grow. They don't connect with other churches. They don't, they have this like I need to protect what's mine, and so they're afraid to look weak in front of staff. All those type of things, and so they become arrogant. But the also part is become lazy. Is that you just go, you know what? It's easy to maintain and to be comfortable, and it's okay if we plateau, and we're okay with that.
Would you say in ministry it's easy to do that too? In some church environments where it's like, this is like I can just do this and get away with it.
I would say it has been. My fear is that after COVID, churches are declining quickly. I think culture has changed. We're a post-Christian culture. So I think churches that are just coasting by are going to find steep decline. I really do. I think you're going to see
scary.
that.
Yeah.
It is scary. But I think for many years, there was the mindset as we were transitioning to a post-Christian culture, there was a mindset, well, we go to church. It's what we do. And a lot of churches survived because of that. After COVID, people realized they either got out of the habit of going to church or they realized I don't have to go to church, like in their mind, whether that's biblical or not. They had it in their mind. And so I think you're going to see the churches that were coasting by are going to decline.
They're not going to make it. Yeah.
And they're not going to make it. So I would say arrogance is another one. Laziness, though, is on the flip side is what I also see. I would just say any person, like if you're on a staff or whatever, work so hard that your boss notices. Be so excellent. All of the senior staff that I've ever promoted in our church have been promoted because they came to me with problems I would have never seen. And
that's such
they
good
told
advice.
me the solution.
Yeah.
And so like you come to me consistently, everyone does. You do this, Katie does this, Stacy does this, Mary does this, Brandon does it. I mean, every leader. Yeah. This is something, Phil and children, this is something that's not working and how we fixed it. Yeah. And I would have never known that. So they're being vulnerable to say, this was broken, now it's fixed. Or this is broken, we don't know how to fix it. Can you help us with it? To me, I go like they're creating more work for themselves. I get that, but they're just showing me how serious they're taking it. But then here's the other thing I would say. You said ask questions. Don't simply ask what are you doing. Ask why are you doing it? Because not killer. Every answer it can translate from one environment to another. So if when I talk with like high level leaders, I can always tell they get it by the questions they ask. And they ask, okay, now why are you doing that? So like you tell them the what and they go, okay, I want to know why.
Yeah.
But why are you doing that? So like the questions are, okay, I know you're doing a podcast, but why are you doing the podcast? What's the ultimate win of that? Okay, I know you don't have music stands on the stage. So don't come to a person and go like, oh, you don't have music stands? Okay, that's what I'm going to do. Go, why don't you have music stands?
Oh, that's so good.
You know what I mean?
Like
The
value point.
Yeah. Why is there value in learning the number system when it comes to chords and all that? Why do you guys do announcements that way?
Super good.
Because it doesn't always translate, but you can understand the why. You go, okay, I can take that why and now adapt it to my environment, and that will make you a better leader.
What you just described is the plague of church creatives. This idea that everybody wants to do what Elevation's doing. I'm not taking shots at Elevation. It's the normal thing to do. You see the cool church that's growing and producing the best music and the slickest graphics. You're like, well, let me copy what they're doing without ever asking why.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden 100%. It bombs.
Yeah.
Like it bombs. You'll do their song or try to do their, I know that because I've done it. Like I'll try to rip off somebody else's culture and do what they're doing. And then it doesn't work because Lancaster, Ohio is different than Ballantyne, which is like a super high income. Like you can look and that's almost the bad part of the internet is we're exposed to churches we would have normally never seen, which is beautiful, but it also comes with some cons of like you see it and you get that fear of missing out of like, I want to do the cool thing.
Yeah.
I saw a church this last year. It was awesome. It would never work here. Like, but I saw churches last year that flooded, or Michael Todd's church flooded a stage, but I saw another one where they did Let It Rain and built like a line of water that came down from a pipe above them into a trough, and it made it look, it was really only raining in like a slot like this big, right? But it looked like the whole stage. It was really clever. I'm like, people here would be like, this is so tacky. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's too showy. Right. But you look at the what of other churches and be like, well, if I copy that, then I'll be successful.
Yeah.
The best question is to ask why, and that might lead you to, okay, what is the principle that I can now culturally apply in our own way? And then all of a sudden you can find success from really small.
Yeah, let me say one last thing to that. So give another example. I talked to a guy who was on staff at a church that's decently large, but the way, I'll just say it this way, the way that this church operated was different. And so I was asking him some why questions, and I discovered they have a larger national and international audience than they do of people who actually attend their church. So they'll have a couple thousand people. So this is a charismatic church, okay? They have a couple thousand people that will attend the church. They'll have 150,000 people watch them globally because of this leaders on TBN and different things, okay?
Yeah.
And I go, oh, that's why you do your online service this way. That's why this looks this way, is because you're gearing toward it. If you don't ask that question, you go, what are they doing? Now you just mimic something, but you're mimicking it and you don't have an international audience, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you put a lot of money into your online experience and you have 17 views on Sunday.
Yeah.
And you go, you should have asked why, because you would ask the question why and go, oh, that's not for us. We don't have an international ministry. It's not
super
what we're
good.
doing.
And I'm being so serious right now. That applies to everything. So as you said that, I thought about the principle of asking why. When I talked to this guy in San Diego about cars, it made me understand what he was saying more when I understood why he was doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you replace this part with this part. What does that actually fix? Why are you doing that? How does that make my car better? Now all of a sudden I understand the principle of what happened, and I can so now if I buy a different car, I'm not like, oh my gosh, the alternator's in a different spot. I don't know what to do. I know probably roughly where to find it because I know what an alternator does, I know why it exists, I know the function of it. And it applies to literally everything, whether you're an accountant, whether you're talking about fixing a car, or whether you're in ministry. Understanding the why helps you make educated decisions.
Yeah.
Those educated decisions leading to action, that's excellence. And and then you said that's the rinse, cycle, repeat. You do that over and over and over again, where you make educated changes, you evaluate it, do it again, evaluate it, critique it, do it again. That's super good.
And I have the privilege of helping pastors and mentored pastors in different areas. I can always tell, I can get a group of pastors in a room. I can always tell the really good leaders by the questions they ask.
Yeah.
When the questions are constantly, now what do you guys do for this and what do you do for that? And then they're just writing it down. And then the person who follows it up with, okay, well, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
I go, that's the leader.
Yeah.
That's the person who wants to know how it will work in their situation.
And they'll probably go apply it and see that change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they can tweak it to make it their own. Because here's also the thing is, what you're doing, I might want to get there eventually, but I can't do it immediately. But if you tell me the why, I can figure out a pathway to get there.
The budget-friendly version that I can do.
For sure.
Super
so
good.
Even like a young musician is not going to write a hit that you can write, but they can figure out the process. Why do you do it this way? So why do you have people write and highlight stuff? Why do you have collaboration? Why do you, a question I asked you before, why are we singing songs like these songs before we release them? And you go, we have to see how they hit in a room.
Yeah.
And I went, I never even thought about that you
Yeah.
could write this song that you think is awesome,
Nobody cares.
and then you play it and it just doesn't hit in
Yeah,
a room, and you
sure.
go, okay, it didn't hit like we thought it was going to hit. So
Yeah, absolutely.
that's one of those questions.
Super good. Well, hey, this concludes season 2. If I could be wrong, hey, here's my encouragement to you. I hope you enjoyed this season. I hope it did 2 major things. One, I hope it encouraged you and taught you how to have better conversations with people, to ask good questions, to be open-minded when someone presents you with information that might be contrary to something you believe, that might even oppose what you believe, to handle that well, with nuance, with spiritual fruit in your life. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I hope it empowers you to glorify God in your everyday life and all these little things. We're talking about the culture of excellence. That's what excellence is. It's even in the way you talk to people, the way you communicate with people, whether it be your spouse, your coworkers, fellow ministers. All of that matters because it all glorifies God. So we want to pursue excellence in those things. And I hope that this season did that for you. I hope it gave you tools that are necessary. And I hope you join us for next season when we start it up next year. As always, if you have any questions, any topics you'd like us to cover, you can you can email us at info@Tree.Church, or you can reach out over Instagram or any other way you could, and we can get back to you. We might not be able to cover it in every podcast, but we can always individually respond to you if we see fit. Thank you. And if you appreciated this, share it. Let people know about it. Let people you love know about it. Anybody who listens to a lot of podcasts, they might have a lot of drive time. They might be interested in church leadership or any kind of nuanced thought. Share it with them. And again, thank you so much for joining us.